Hello, learners. Welcome back to the course on social processes and behavioral issues. We are in Unit 9 and Session 3 of the course. Now, today we shall be talking about the impact of personality traits on organizational behavior. In specific, what shall we be covering in the class today? We'll be looking at the impact of personality on organizational behavior, and we'll be also looking at a very interesting and important topic in organizational behavior, which is emotional intelligence and its impact on personality. So, both of them are important to the study of personality in the context of organization. So, here we are, and we build on the previous two sessions in this unit as we go along. So, if we look at the kinds of personality traits which impact OB, there are many, but we will be discussing certain very important traits which are very often taken up by researchers as well. And the first of them is called as risk taking. Now, people differ in their willingness to take chances. Their propensity to assume or avoid risk has been shown to have an impact on how long it takes managers to make decisions and how much information they require before making their choice. Now, the idea here is very simple, that there are certain societies which are more prone to taking risks than others. So, if we look at the Hofstedian dimensions look at the amazingly comprehensive cross-cultural framework which was developed by Hofstede in the 1980s, where he had made assessments on many different countries of the world based on certain value dimensions. And one of those value dimensions was uncertainty avoidance. Now, if you look at this value dimension, Hofstede had proved through his study that there are certain societies in the world which have more propensity for uncertainty or more propensity for risk, whereas there are other societies in the world which do not absorb risk so easily. The same is with individuals in organizations. Now, how much ambiguity can a manager tolerate? How much risk can a manager bear? If a manager can bear risks, then the manager is prone to make quick decisions. But if the manager has a lower capacity to tolerate risks, then there is a chance that a lot more evaluation will go in before a person or a manager makes a decision. Now, the next trait that impacts OB is self-monitoring. And what is self-monitoring? It refers to an individual's ability to adjust his or her behavior to external factors. Individuals high in self-monitoring can show considerable adaptability in adjusting their behavior to external forces or external factors. They are highly sensitive to external cues meaning signals from the environment, and can behave differently in different situations. Low self-monitors cannot deviate from their behavior as easily as in comparison to high self-monitors. So basically, research has found out that high self-monitors confirm more. They're easily adaptable and they're very responsive to signals that they receive from the external environment. Whereas people who are low on self-monitoring, they do not really adapt themselves to the external environment, or even if they do so, they take considerable more time. Now, moving on, we have two personality types which are called as type A and type B. Now, what are they? Type A is a movement prone personality where, these are people who love to do kinesthetics. For example, walking, talking, eating, they are always on the move. They are impatient, they multitask, but they cannot cope with leisure. They are very restless if they have some time to themselves. And they are obsessed with numbers, and they measure their success with how much they acquire. Now, when we look at type B is the bipolar opposite. So, what are they? They are calm and restful with no sense of urgency. They never feel the need to display their achievements until asked for. They play for fun and relaxation, and they can relax without guilt. So, they don't have this urge in themselves to keep on proving themselves at the cost of all others. Now, moving on from type A and type B, we come to another interesting though important trait, which is called as self-esteem. Now, what is self-esteem? Self-esteem is the outcome of an individual's continuous evaluation of himself or herself, which will be assessments reflecting his or her response to others' opinions, situational requirements, successes, and failures. Now, if you have more of self-esteem, that is the question that we have with us. If you have more of self-esteem, then how does it impact your life in an organization? Now, what are its impacts on OB? The first is the choice of vocation. What kind of vocation will you take up? If you are high on self-esteem or if you have low self-esteem. The second point leads from the first, which says that high self-esteem is more lean or more skewed towards higher status jobs as perceived by the society. Then goals that individuals set are also influenced to a great deal by self-esteem. That means people with high self-esteem set more and more challenging goals for themselves. Employees with low self-esteem are more sensitive to adverse job conditions such as stress, conflict, ambiguity, and poor supervision. And because they have low self esteem, they do not have much confidence in their abilities to carry things through in an organization. Now, moving on, the next area that we need to discuss is the locus of control. Locus of control is the belief of the individual on the extent to which he or she can control events happening or affecting them. Now, supposing I have a high locus of control, then I'm focused inward. Now, if I have a low locus of control, then my focus is outwards. That means I easily get affected by the events which are happening around me. Now, as is written here, high locus of control individuals believe that it is their own actions that determine the course of events in their lives. They do not set much of store in fate, that it's because of fate that such and such things happen. No, they believe that it is their agency, their choices that govern the kind of decisions or that govern the kind of situations that will take place in their lives. But on the other hand, people are low on locus of control, they get affected by the events around them and they give control to things which are external to them. So that's the idea. High locus of control, the control is internally governed. Low locus of control, the control is externally governed. Now, what's the next trait that we need to talk about? It's it's an interesting trait once again, which is called as Machiavellianism. Now, Machiavellianism is a trait that developed from the works of the Italian philosopher called Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli was a philosopher who had written a very controversial treatise, which was called as The Prince. And in The Prince, he had given a world famous statement that the ends very often justify the means. So it was a very different context that he was talking about. It was a very different Italy that Machiavelli was talking about. And he had asked for the division or the de-linking of religion and politics for the state or the country to run smoothly. Now, if we borrow Machiavellianism or the ideas that Niccolo Machiavelli had provided in The Prince, then what do we have with us? We have a person who believes that ends justify the means. High Macs are manipulative, they try to win more often, and they persuade more than they can be persuaded. And they work best with minimal rules and regulations. They are not people who are rule bound, or they are not people who are regulation bound, because, as I said rightly, that ends do justify the means. And that is the firm belief that they go by. So they set much in store for results rather than the process in which they attempt to reach those results. Now, moving ahead, we have even more interesting and important traits, personality traits that affect OB, and they are self efficacy, which is a gift from the social cognitive theory by Bandura. Self efficacy is among one of the most researched constructs in OB, and it is important in all aspects of human behavior. Now, what is this? This is basically the belief of individuals in their own self competence. That means if I have a high sense of self efficacy, then I think that whatever I am aiming for, I will be competent enough to achieve it. Now, what is the next? The next is core self evaluation. This is the degree to which people like or dislike themselves. Very often we think that who will not like themselves? If I'm an individual, I will definitely like myself, but that's not always the case. There are people who really think that they are okay, but there are people who always are dissatisfied with themselves and they aspire for more. So, if there is a positive self evaluation, that means you like what you are, then that leads to higher job performance. Then comes another interesting, though negative trait, which is called narcissism. Narcissism is a person who's obsessed with himself or herself, and this is an arrogant, entitled, self important person who needs excessive admiration. So now they are not very effective in their jobs because they constantly need the presence of others to tell them how good they are. Now, moving on, you go to another area which is called as goal orientation. Now, there are two categories of goal orientations with very different results in organization behavior. The first is called as learning goal orientation, and this is a predisposition to develop competence by acquiring new skills and mastering new situations. So, people with strong learning goal orientation try to overcome failure and setback by putting in more efforts and looking out for new solutions to problems. So these are people who like to achieve and master themselves in difficult and new or tricky situations. Now, a slightly more, what should I say, a slightly more different kind of orientation is called as performance goal orientation. So, what does it mean? It's a predisposition to demonstrate and validate your competence by trying to obtain favorable judgments from others, such as one's own supervisor, and refrain from negative judgments. So, what is performance goal orientation? I demonstrate my competence. Why? Because I want to gain the, let us say, the judgment that is positive from people who matter to me. For example, my boss, for example, my peers, for example, my subordinates. My intention here is not to demonstrate my competence because I want to learn something, but it's rather to manage the perceptions that others would form about me. So, when I'm looking at learning goal orientation, it is my strive, my internal efforts to learn more and more, to adapt better in new situations that I face. But when I'm looking at performance goal orientation, research has shown that these are not people who would set out challenging goals for themselves because their entire effort is to manage the kind of perceptions or the impressions that others form about them, depending on the kind of work they exhibit. Now, moving on, we have the typical traits of introversion and extroversion. Introversion refers to the tendency to direct everything inward. The energy for introverts comes from within them and develop greater affinity for abstract ideas, and you become sensitive to personal feelings. Whereas extroversion refers to the tendency to orient towards other people. Now, the energy for extroverts comes from people around them. So, an extrovert by nature is one who is sociable, lively, impulsive, and also emotionally very expressive, whereas an introvert by nature is quiet, introspective, and emotionally not very expressive, rather unimpressive. Now, coming to a negative personality trait that's called dogmatism. What does it mean? A high dogmatic person appears to be close minded and prefers to depend on authoritative persons in organization for guidance and direction, and hence can be more influenced by such persons. As against these, people with low dogmatic tendency are open minded, cannot be easily influenced by authoritative figures in the organizations like high dogmatic persons. Now, sometimes dogmatism or your staunch belief in certain activities can lead to tremendous amount of disasters. For example, our dogmatic beliefs about our own religion and the religion of others can lead us to have very, very negative thoughts about people who may not be belonging to the same caste, to the same ethnicity, or to the same religious background like ours. But whereas if you have people who are low on dogmatism, they're very open-minded. They would prefer to learn from their experience rather than be guided by authoritarian people in their organization or in the society. Now, a very similar trait to dogmatism is authoritarianism. So, what does it mean? It may be related to dogmatism, but it's slightly narrower in focus. It refers to a person who displays qualities such as adherence to conventional values, obeys recognized authority, has a negative view of society, respects power and toughness, and opposes expression of personal feelings. Now, these are people who have a very directive and structured leadership style, and they also are people who will flourish or do better under a directive and structured leadership style. Now, moving on to the last areas that we need to cover in this session, and that's quite interesting because it talks about a concept which is heavily discussed, debated, and researched in organization behavior, and that's called as emotional intelligence, or popularly known as EQ. Now, what is its impact on personality? But even before we talk of emotional intelligence, I would like to speak a little more about emotions. What are emotions? Emotions are physiological, behavioral, and psychological episodes experienced towards an object, person, or event that can create a state of readiness or what I understand as action. Now let's understand what this definition of emotions is. Now, for example, I'm angry. When I'm angry, even though I may not display, there is a bodily change in me that is at the physiological level. There can be a behavioral change in me that can be observed or that I may try to keep well hidden. Whatever it is, it may express in my behavior. Then there's something called as the mind or the psychology, which also is involved when an emotional episode is taking place. Now, emotions are directed. They are not non directive states, they are directed towards someone or something. For example, we experience joy, fear, anger, and other emotional episodes. Now, they are not very general like moods, which are actually less intense in nature, and they are actually not directed towards anything in particular. For example, let us say that I'm in a bad mood today. So, what does meaning of, or what does this bad mood mean? That normally is not directed to anything or anyone. But emotions are very direct and they are very, very intense episodes that naturally last for a shorter amount of time. Now, emotions are experiences regarding how our body responds to the environment, and they are also a communication mechanism with our conscious self. So, if I'm looking at the basic emotions like anger, like fear, like joy, or happiness, I mean, these are the basic emotional states that you can think of or talk about. These are actually episodes, and that's the reason why they don't last for a very long period of time. They're more intense, they're more directed, and they involve all the three aspects. What are those all the three aspects? The bodily changes, the mind changes, and the behavioral changes. Now, moving on, emotional intelligence is a concept which talks of management of emotions. Now, if you are emotionally intelligent, you are not only able to manage your own self, but you are also able to manage others. So, this is basically divided into four quadrants, which are again on two criteria. The first is recognition of emotions, and the second is regulation of emotions. Now, let's come to the first quadrant, which is talking about self awareness. So, here is where you have emotional self awareness. That means you are in touch, conscious touch with your own emotions. You make accurate self assessments and you have self confidence. Then you come to social awareness, where you are able to empathize with others. Finally, when you come to the third quadrant, you are moving into the zone of regulation from recognition, which is self management. That means you have emotional self control, you have the ability to adapt. Then there is initiative, achievement, optimism in you towards the last quadrant, which is relationship management. Now, this is the best quadrant of all, which talks of inspirational leadership, the way in which you can not only influence your own self, but others. You become a change catalyst and you also resolve conflict and promote teamwork. So basically, the idea behind emotional intelligence is the first awareness should be of one's own conscious self. That means you are conscious that these are the kind of emotional episodes that you have. Now, once you develop that consciousness, you are able to regulate what you are conscious about. And this regulation helps you monitor your own emotions and manage the states of others. Now, today, in this session, we have gone through 100-fold personality traits which might have impact on organization behavior. And we have also talked about how high and low personality traits can have differing impacts in organizations. We have rounded this session by a discussion on how emotions are actually very, very important to one's functioning within the organization. As we continue further, we will be talking about more and more different aspects in this course. But here I end this session, and once again, a very, very happy learning to each one of you. Thank you.